The early summer of 1967, our family moved from Laverne, California to Kingsville, Texas. And I was supposed to start teaching in September, so we had several months free. We decided at that time, since Stephen and Craig, our two sons, were old enough and big enough to camp out a bit, it was a great time to do a trip to Alaska. So we had two neighbor boys that lived right next to us, Ricky Jones and Wendell Jones, that wanted to go along with us. And then we had our friend Kim Witcher. He wanted to go along. We had a friend back in Laverne, California. He was going to join us later. And then we had a relative, George Swihart. He wanted to take him too. So we started out anyway with just Stephen and Craig and Ricky and Wendell there and Kim. Kim lived nearby in Fremont. And so we started out from Kingsville, and we traveled north toward Austin where George was. And so as we came up to Austin, we camped out at Bastrop State Park. And Bastrop is a lovely place to camp, and we camped out over there and got our first night out. And then we got our pictures in front of the camera of the van. The van was fairly new, and we had made a box on top to put all our stuff, and we had carriers, fasteners to fasten the box to the Volkswagen van. And so we pasted on the front. We wrote on the front, Texas is where we're from, and on the back we wrote Alaska. That's where we were headed. And then we traveled up to Bastrop, and then shortly thereafter we went into Austin, near Austin, to Marbridge Ranch, where we got George. And then we traveled from there all the way north to McPherson, Kansas. And there we met Robert Eikenberry, who was a good friend of Stephen's from high school back in Laverne. And he had come from California all the way to be with his grandpa, S.M. Dell in McPherson. So we went to the home of Mr. Dell, and there we met Robert, and he joined our crew. And so then we were ready to go, and we had the whole crew there in front of Mr. Dell's house, and we got some pictures of our group before we took off. And then we headed on northways. There's just north of McPherson, there's a hill. And it's famous because it's believed that when the Coronado, way back in the 1500s, came north looking for the lost city of Quivira, that he got as far as this point on this hill, looked all around, didn't see any lost city, so he gave up and started back to Mexico. But they've built an old Spanish fort on top of this hill, so we went up there to Coronado Heights, and we got up on top of this old fort, and we got our picture there, and looked out over the flat plains of Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado, and then we moved on from there. We kept looking for a good weather and a day when there wasn't any wind, and where we'd be in a flat area where there was no danger of starting any fires, because Steve had been building homemade rockets. You get a kit, and then you put it all together, and then it would fire off a multi-stage rocket. The first stage would go up, and then the second stage would ignite and go even higher. And so we were looking for a place where we could fire it off and not too much wind would blow it all over. So finally in eastern Colorado, we found just the right time and place. We drove off the highway a ways on a side road and set up our rocket launching equipment. And so then we could fire it off and it would go almost straight up. And then when it get way up there, the second stage would go off, and then finally a parachute would open. And we could watch it come floating back down, and we could go over and rescue the what was left of the rocket. We got some pictures of us standing around in the flat plains.
Dad,
and then from there,
Dad,
yes.
I have a recollection there of some kind of a box that I took along on the journey, and a wooden box I made to to carry the rockets in so they wouldn't get squashed. Do you have any recollection of that?
Yes, I remember we had everything in that box so it wouldn't get damaged because it's a pretty scientific kind of thing. I remember we had quite an elaborate countdown, 10, 9, 8,
Yeah,
7, 6.
yeah,
Then we pressed the button and that fired off, and
yeah,
we all got back, and away it went, and it was quite exciting.
yeah, yeah.
Then we went from out there in the plains on into Denver. And there I wanted everybody to see the Denver Museum of Natural History. They've got some wonderful dioramas there of animal scenes of in the northwest of the grizzly bears and then of Africa and other parts of the world. So we spent a very delightful time in the Denver Museum there and got some pictures of us. Then we traveled on north of Denver and crossed the line into Wyoming. And then we turned, instead of going straight north, we went a little bit west into the Medicine Bow Mountains. And the roads were not quite so good back over in there. That was kind of a little side trip. But we went way up high into the mountains and got up into, high up into the pine trees and where there was a lot of snow. And it had melted everywhere else, but there it was high enough and sheltered enough that we got into some snowbanks. So for those of us who'd been in the south, had been in the warm weather, being on a snowbank, and gave us a chance to get pictures of us standing in the snow. And we even got to some snowballs. And I think we have a picture here of us throwing snowballs at each other. And we had a little fun there. But it was cold. I remember we camped out up in there. It was our first night up in the cold, and we had to learn to use our sleeping bags. The road was kind of rough up in there, and it bounced us around pretty bad, and we damaged the supports for our box on top of the car. I had to stop at a little town, find a guy that was good at welding. He welded some stronger metal supports to hold the box up on there, and he did a good job, so that after that, on the whole rest of the trip, the box was strong enough to withstand all the jouncing and bouncing and bad road that we had. So we saw some beautiful scenery high up in the Medicine Bow Mountains, and then we had fun. And then we saw coming down out of the mountains onto the flat prairie. We saw off in the distance clouds blowing around, looked like a funnel cloud forming. So we stopped and wondered whether we should go forward into that funnel cloud, and we took some pictures. Looked like a tornado blowing out there, but then it traveled away from us, and so we went forward, moved on north, and as we got closer, we began to get into the mountains. We came into the south part of the Grand Tetons, and we stopped there and took pictures of the high Teton Mountains with the snow on the top. And there's a special little chapel there. The front of the chapel is open so that the worship center is not a cross or a picture of Jesus, but it was the mountains. You could see all of God's creation there in that little church. So we got some pictures there, and then we went on north of Grand Tetons into the Yellowstone National Park. And there we went to, of course, nobody goes to Yellowstone without looking at the Old Faithful geyser. So we went there and waited until it went off. Then we got there and got to see the geyser erupt, and then we went afterwards. Nearby there was a whole area of hot springs and pools of boiling hot water, and so we went with the ranger on a tour, and he explained about the different mineral pools. The water in the different pools was a slightly different color due to the minerals that were in it, and so he told us the history and stuff of that, and we enjoyed being with the ranger, looking at those boiling hot pools of water and listening to that. Then on north in Yellowstone Park, we came to Yellowstone Canyon and the Yellowstone Falls. And so we stopped some distance away and took pictures of the falls. And then we came, there's an upper and lower falls. And then we came to a place where we could go down about 150, 200 steps or so to the brink of the falls. So all of us were in good physical shape. We went bouncing down the steps and came to the falls and to the top of the falls. And there we leaned on the rail and looked over the edge, watched the water go plunging down over the falls into the canyon below. The canyon is beautiful because of all the colored rocks and soil. It's all yellow and red and green and bluish. So it's this beautiful scenery there, just looking at the falls. Then we went on from Yellowstone on north toward into Montana and went traveling toward Glacier National Park. And we camped out overnight in southern Montana, kind of followed the edge of the mountains up northern, getting closer and closer to Glacier Park. We had several tents here. We had this big green tent, and then we had several small pup tents, so we all got under cover at night when didn't get all soaked with dew in the morning. And in the morning, we'd start up our little Coleman stove, cook some pancakes or oatmeal or whatever we could think of for breakfast. So we got used to camping out, fixing our meals, and then moving on. And one of the places in Montana, we saw a mountain that had a face kind of on it, a big cliff sticking up there. And then on the face of that cliff, it looked like a human face, a nose and eyes and chin. So we got the pictures of that interesting Chief's Head mountain. And then finally we got to the edge of Glacier and all the steep cliffs and high mountains there. And so we stopped and took pictures. Some people got better pictures by laying down on the road and looking at getting their camera or binoculars. And we got a good taste of the mountains right on the border of Canada. And then we enjoyed being there and camping out in Glacier Park. And then as we drove through Glacier, there's some beautiful lakes there, the big long lakes, 15, 20 miles long. And it's the Upper St. Mary's Lake. And one of the lakes has an island, a goat island, out in the middle of it. And you can see the snow-capped peaks all around, and then this beautiful lake down below. And so it was a beautiful place to be. And we drove through the park, and then on north, ground to Waterton Lakes National Park, which is in Canada. And in Canada, there was a beautiful Waterton Lake, which is very much like Lake St. Mary's. And then we went up on a little side road to a little trail that went up to a lake hidden up in an upper valley. The only way to get there was on this little ledge trail. And so we decided, some of us, to try to follow that trail, go on up there, that upper lake. So we started out, all of us on the side of the cliff here, started up the trail. And then some of the folks decided they'd rather wait in the car. So only a smaller group of us went on all the way up to the lake up at top. And you see George there with carrying a backpack, and we had some extra rope with us. But we found that along the trail there was a cable that had been installed, and we used our rope too, just to kind of hang on to make us steady if in case we slip or something. But the ledge was several feet wide, and we had things to hang on to. So it was kind of nice to go up that trail all the way up. We kept going up that ledge and going up, and then we came to a place where we had to scramble up a gully or two. And they had some rope here, and we used our rope too. And so we scrambled up there, and finally we got to a place where we could see the opening there that opened up into the upper valley. And then we saw the lake up there, and we climbed around and got some nice pictures of us on the cliff. And then we came scrambling back down and got in our car and drove on over to the town of Calgary. And Calgary has a very interesting city park they had made some big cement images of dinosaurs. So we got out and got some of our pictures there beside a big cement dinosaur that was there in the middle of the city park. Got a good chance to see what the dinosaurs were like and how big they were. And then we went on north from Calgary to Banff National Park in Canada. And one of the famous places in Banff is a place called Lake Louise. And it's quite a famous resort. A beautiful lake there and beautiful flowers around it and a big lodge, big fancy hotel, and a trail all the way around the lake. And then right in front of the lodge, there's a famous guy playing his bagpipes, and a great place to rent canoes and sail around on the lake. And then back of the lake is this huge mountain all covered with snow and glaciers. So you get this beautiful view out the windows of the lodge. So people could afford to stay in the lodge. They could come and stay in comfort, be waited on by all sorts of people, and look at that beautiful scenery at the same time. We camped out there and enjoyed hearing the bagpipe player, watching the campers and the hikers go walking by. We enjoyed being in Banff very much. It was very nice. And then nearby to Banff, just nearby to Lake Louise, just over the hill and around the corner, there was another beautiful lake, and they call it the Valley of the 10 Peaks. And there we drove over and got out of the car and hiked up on a little hill, and there we saw this beautiful lake. And it would peak 10 peaks, each one with a special name, all around this beautiful lake. And the peaks are all very impressive, tall, big, high peaks, and looking down into this beautiful blue water. And we were up on a little knoll, so we had a nice view from higher up a little bit, and I saw this Valley of 10 Peaks and the beautiful lake and all the peaks around it, the reflection in the lakes. And we enjoyed being there for quite a while, looking and climbing around on that knoll. It's kind of like a little hill, maybe 200 or 300 feet high, and enjoying the peaks. Then we went on north from there, just a little ways, and there's 3 national parks there. One is the Banff National Park, and then there's Jasper National Park on north, and then Yoho National Park in between. And right at Yoho, there's this beautiful waterfalls. It comes crashing down from way up on high, and it's got an interesting Indian name of Takakau Falls. And so we drove up to that falls, and it was cold, and the wind was blowing a spray from the falls all over us, but we got to see this beautiful high falls, several hundred feet high, crashing down from way on up. And so we saw Takakau Falls. Then we drove on north from there toward Jasper, and it's called the Columbia Highway or Columbia Icefields Road. And so they're on both sides of the road. There are these tall peaks with snow on them, and you're down in the valley kind of driving up, looking at the peaks on both sides. And then we get to the Columbia Icefields. And before we got there, though, we stopped to look at the Punchbowl Falls. And we had to drive up a little side road and get out and hike up a trail. And then here comes this falls down into a punch bowl, or kind of a little lake there, and then it runs out of there and on further down. And so all our young folks decided to climb around and see how high we could get and how close we could see the punch bowl. So everybody was out there climbing on that rock, trying to see into how far they could get up there and look into the punch bowl. This wasn't a big, tall, high waterfalls, hundreds of feet, but it was pretty. and the way it fell into that little hidden bowl in there, a punch bowl, kind of they called it. So we enjoyed climbing around, looking at that nice little waterfalls there. There's another Punchbowl Falls, but it isn't quite so spectacular down on the Columbia River down in Oregon. So there's really two Punchbowl Falls. Then as we traveled further north, we got to the Columbia Glacier. And that's a great, massive sheet of ice. It's hundreds of feet thick and moving slowly. And right now it's kind of moving backwards. Every year it melts back a little bit. And then they've got signs up showing where it was in earlier, and then a little bit every year it goes back a couple of feet, the edge of it melting away. We had fun climbing around on that glacier and seeing the cracks in it, known as crevasses, and the wind blowing down across that sheet of ice was cold. We had to have our warm jackets to look at the Columbia Icefields or Columbia Glacier. And then we moved on north from there. As we were leaving Jasper Park, we found a logging road that cut a shortcut that didn't go all the way into Edmonton and then back out. So we could just cut across about 50 miles of logging road north and catch the highway again that would go north toward Alaska. So we thought this is a good chance to try out our vehicle, see if it would stand the Alaska highway, because we knew the Alaska highway was 1,100 miles of gravel road. So we tried out this first 50 miles on logging road there. Our vehicle did pretty good. It went over all the gravel, bounced around a little bit, but we were able to stand it. And so we traveled through the logging road and got on the highway and went on north to Dawson Creek. And when we got to Dawson Creek, this is the official starting place of the Alaska Highway. So there in the middle of town, they've got mile marker 0, and that's where you start. And then you count 1,100 miles all the way to Fairbanks. So we got some pictures of ourselves there, and it's got several flags up there because we're going through we're going through Canada and then back into the United States when we get to Alaska. So the road out of Dawson Creek isn't so bad. It's paved for the next 20, 30 miles. But then after a while, you get up the road here a ways, and you get to the end of the paved road. And there you see the last of the paving of the road and the beginning of the gravel road. And then from there on, it's nothing but gravel. They had big gravel, what do you call them, road pavers, big graders. About every 100 miles, there'd be a crew out running their grader, this big machine with a big, like a blade on it that pushes the gravel and smooths it all out, covers up all the potholes. So they would be working on it. And when you get into a new zone that they hadn't been on for a while, it'd be pretty rough, full of potholes. And then the closer you'd get to where they'd been working, the smoother the road would be. So we'd be traveling along pretty dusty sometimes, driving on a dusty road, kicking up a cloud of dust. The people coming the other way or people ahead of you would leave dust all over your windshield. Then one night we got to a place, we were looking for a place to camp, and nearby were some hot springs. We were looking forward to camping there, and this was a place called Lower Post. And about the time we got there, we heard the funny noises in the motor. It was going clinkety-clink, bang, bang, and it was drizzling and cold. And we kind of limped into this little filling station here at Lower Post, and it was closed up for the night. So we had to sit in the vehicle while it drizzled outside and wait for the morning. And then we were hoping that they had a mechanic there who'd figure out what to do with our motor that wasn't running right. And so in the morning, we found out they didn't have a very good mechanic. And the nearest mechanic was way over at Whitehorse. And so we have to get the vehicle to Whitehorse, and we might have to get a tow truck or something to take us. And then the guy said, well, I've got a beat up old pickup truck here. I'll sell you for a couple $100, and you could tow it all the way over there. So we bought the pickup truck from him, and we hooked up a tow rope and began to tow the vehicle all the way to Whitehorse, a couple 100 miles.
Dad,
And
it wasn't a tow rope. He welded a V made out of metal on the front of the bumper,
oh, that's right.
the
Yeah,
bumper of the Volkswagen.
that's right. That helped a lot. That made it a lot easier. We didn't have to be jerking and jerking around a lot. So the first 20 miles or so, we had to get to a place called Watson Lake. And Watson Lake is famous because everybody likes to come there and bring their hometown sign. And then there's a lot of posts there, and they post their sign from whatever town they're from. So there's signs here from towns all over the U.S. and Canada, a lot of different places in the world. And so we got pictures here of people in front of all the signs. But we were having trouble when we got to Watson Lake because we discovered that the pickup truck we'd got had a hole in the tank, and the gasoline was all running out. So we had to take the tank out of the car and get it welded and fixed so it wouldn't leak, and put it back in. So we spent several hours here with the welder. They had to fill the tank with water, and then so it wouldn't explode. Then they got the welding on it and got it fixed, and then put back in. Then we bought more gasoline. Then we took our one or two last pictures at Watson Lake. And then we had the adventures of getting all the way from Watson Lake to Whitehorse. And we told about that in a previous discussion that we had here, a little storytelling event. On the way, the Volkswagen kind of slid off the road and leaned over or fell over on its side, and we had to get it straightened back up and towed further. Finally, we got to Whitehorse. And Whitehorse is a town with lots of old log cabins. And so we found a mechanic there who knew how to fix our Volkswagen. So he said it would take about a week to get it fixed. So we moved into a campsite nearby. And we were interested to discover here in Whitehorse the first and only 3-story high log cabin we'd ever seen. And lots of other log cabins all over town. But we camped out in a little city park, and we had got a picture of our pickup truck and our tents. And we had a fun time camping there at Whitehorse while they worked on our car, our van. And then we got it all. We had a nice little place to camp, and we spent several days there in Whitehorse getting familiar with the town. Hiked all over town and got to know the everything that it was to be seen in Whitehorse, and had fun with playing with each other and getting better acquainted. And here was we had a picture of the workshop where they fixed our van. And you can see the van in our picture there parked over on the side, and they were getting parts for the motor and took the motor out and took it apart. The bushings were bad. Some bearings had gone out, so they had to get new parts and put in. And then we got it together, and after we got it fixed, it ran very well. We didn't have any more trouble with it for the rest of the trip. And so all of us had been traveling for several weeks by now, and we hadn't been bothering to shave. So we were all growing long hair and big beards, those of us that were old enough to grow beards. And George was one who had real good looking blonde beard that he was growing. And so we took pictures of each other growing long hair and big beards. And then we noticed that around the Whitehorse there were museums the different ancient, back in the days when there was gold rush, and a lot of legends and stories about famous woodsmen and pioneers, men prospectors who'd traveled all through that country finding the gold where the gold was. Apparently at one time the river was deeper and better, and they ran big boats up the river full of people who wanted to be miners and dig for gold. Now the river is shallower and they can't run the boats on the river anymore. So a lot of the old paddle wheel steamers are parked on the side and kind of serve as places to look at and explore, and museums. And no longer they don't run those boats on the river anymore. And so there's a lot of interesting things to look at as you go through the town of Whitehorse. Cabins where some of the prospectors lived, and the saloons and boarding houses and all kinds of interesting things. And then finally we got back on the road and traveled north through this. We're in the Yukon by now. We're out of some of the territories and states of Canada into a part of Canada that's known as the Yukon. And the road running along beside some lakes here, and we're getting closer and closer as we travel up toward the border of Alaska. Finally, we come to the border of Alaska, and there we got a paved road. And so we got out and celebrated that we didn't have to fight the dust anymore and bounce around quite so much, a little smoother road. So we enjoyed being back in the United States and in Alaska. And you notice we'd been putting the names of places we'd been on the side of the box where we kept all our stuff, because there was quite a number of us inside the van, and so there wasn't a lot of room for equipment. And so we had put a lot of it in the box on top of the van. And then finally we got all the way to Fairbanks. And up in Fairbanks, which is pretty near the top of Alaska, they were having a fair. And in 1967, they were celebrating a centennial, 100 years since founding of the city or something. And so they were having a big celebration and bringing in people and building a part of the town they rebuilt as kind of a pioneer town. And so they had the signpost here saying this is the end of the Alaska Highway. And then they had a visitor center. And then we got some guides as we went through the fairgrounds and celebration. We had this nice young Indian lady that showed us around, explained things to us, how the Indians used to live and how the gold miners survived the cold winters and tried to make a living, and how the people that came there to settle and farm, how they managed to go. They had built the whole part of the town as kind of a pioneer town, all kind of old-fashioned buildings, and then places you could buy souvenirs, also places that kind of served as little museums. So we had fun wandering around there in Fairbanks for several days. It was far enough north now that at night it didn't get dark very long. We had to learn to go to bed and sleep even when there was the sun shining outside and the bright light was still there. We had to put our heads under some kind of a blanket or something so we could have enough darkness we could sleep. But then we started going toward the southern part, and we came down around Mount McKinley, and they call it Mount Denali in Alaska. That's the Indian name for the highest peak there in Alaska. And so we got near Mount McKinley. Usually there's so much fog and so much clouds, you can't really ever get to see Mount McKinley unless you fly around over with a helicopter or hit them on the 1 or 2 days a year when it's visible. But we went over the high tundra. We could see grizzly bears and moose and beautiful scenery as we traveled down the road past Mount McKinley or Denali. And finally we got to Anchorage. And Anchorage had had a terrible earthquake several years before we got there. And we went out to the place where the earthquake had occurred, and there had been houses and buildings, and then the ground shook and trembled and slid, and all those buildings got churned around and fell down. So it really looked like a disaster area when we could see where that earthquake had really torn up the town. Hundreds of people died in that terrible earthquake that they'd had. Then we got back in our car and started back and went back over the same road, back through the Yukon, back through Whitehorse, all the way down toward the border with the United States. And then we took the Fraser River Valley and came on in toward Vancouver, just on the border with Washington State. And there in Vancouver, they have a big city park, and they have collected there a lot of totem poles. And so we wandered around in Stanley Park in Vancouver and Victoria, and they had an exhibit there of killer whales, and they had trained them to do all sorts of stunts. And so we enjoyed watching the killer whales and looking at the totem poles. They even had a huge, big old tree trunk that it was fixed so you could climb to the top of it if you were clever. And so some of us got a chance to see if we could climb to the top of that big old tree trunk. It was big enough that could have made a house out of it. We had fun scrambling around in that park and enjoying it. And then we went north of Vancouver a little ways, of the Ritchie family. These were relatives of Wendell and Ricky Jones. And so we spent the night there with them and had a good time, a good meal with them, and camped out on their front lawn. Some of us slept indoors and some slept out on the lawn, and we enjoyed being with them. Then we crossed over the border and went south into Washington State. And as we drove along the border with the Pacific Ocean, there was a place we could get on a ferry boat ride and go off to some of the offshore islands. And then there's a highway around on the islands out there that are just off the shore of Washington State, north of Seattle. So we got on the ferry boat and got a chance to try out what it's like to be on the high seas for a little ways. And so it was riding around in this big old ship, and had the cars down below, and we were up above on the deck, and enjoyed being in the high seas there for a little while. Then we eventually got back on the mainland and got to Seattle, and then we saw at Seattle the famous Space Needle that they had constructed. They had built a real tall tower and then a restaurant up at the top, and the restaurant rotates and turns around. Other cities copied what Seattle had pioneered, and soon there was this big tall tower like that in San Antonio and in other places in the world. But I think Seattle made the first one way back in 1967 or before. So we took our ride up the elevator and looked at their restaurant up there on the top. Then we came back down and traveled a little further south from Seattle, and soon we began to see this looming high mountain, Mount Rainier. And it seems so much higher and better than a lot of other mountains because you're at sea level. A lot of high mountains that you see, you're in the valley at 6,000 feet and you're looking up to the peak at 14,000, 15,000 feet. But when you're in Washington State for Mount Rainier, you're sitting on the coastline, and here's this mountain that's almost 14,000 feet towering up above you. And so it's very impressive to see this vast, tremendous peak of Mount Rainier. and a whole lot of it is covered with ice and snow and glaciers. And but to drive up to it, you go over many miles of traveling through the woods and pine trees, and finally you get up to where all the snow is, and then it gets you a chance to get out and climb around on the snow on the side of the mountain. And there's a lot of snowbanks just everywhere, and we enjoyed sliding on some of it. There's a gentle slope, and it's slippery. Here on Mount Rainier, the sliding around on those snowbanks was great fun for us. We had a good, enjoyable time doing that. Then we heard about an ice cave that we wanted to go and see. And so this was a cave where the melting glacier melted out from underneath or inside. And so it made it kind of like a huge cave that was in the ice. So we decided to hike over to where that was. And then we got to the ice cave here, and we had to hike across the snowbank. And so we hiked over, passed on some running streams and past more big banks of ice and snow. Finally, we got to this old glacier that was several hundred feet thick of solid ice. And then we saw where the water was running out the bottom end of it. And we walked in there, and there was a nice little trail. And we got back inside, and here was this beautiful ice cave. It was very impressive because it was carved or melted out of solid ice. And the light shining in there was kind of a bluish color. It was very impressive that the light effect was impressive. Just the kind of the bluish light shining in here, and coming through, some of the shining through the ice, and some of it just reflected around inside the cave. So we had fun walking across there, and then we got back out, got in our car, and started traveling further south just a ways till we got to the Columbia River. And then there's a highway that runs along the edge of the Columbia River, and along this highway just north of Portland that we ran into the area where there's a series of tremendous waterfalls. And one of the waterfalls is quite famous, known as Montezuma Falls. And so they've got this all fixed up for tourists with a bridge in there that you can walk on, and place to stand to take pictures. So it's a very impressive waterfalls to see that Multnomah Falls. So we enjoyed parking there and then going up the steps and looking around the falls. You can hike all the way to the top of the falls and various places around the falls at different points. And then it falls down into a kind of like a little lake, and then there's a second falls that comes on down to the highway level, and then the highway is right by Columbia River that flows on out past Portland and on out into the Pacific Ocean. So we enjoyed being in Portland for a little while, and then we traveled on down through central Oregon. And in the middle of Oregon, there's a national park known as Crater Lake National Park. And Crater Lake is, you drive and drive up on this high mountain. Finally, you get to the top, and here's this big crater. Apparently, the mountain was a volcano at one time and erupted. Then water collected in the crater, made a real deep lake. But there's a part of the little old crater here in the middle of it that's where it had another eruption, and some lava and stuff spewed up. So there's an island in the middle of that crater lake, that second eruption where the lava and ashes came firing up out of it. And then it's real steep all the way around it. There's a trail all the way around the crater, and there's a visitor center there, and we had a good time. Some of the folks that were with us, Steve, Craig, Rick, Wendell, George, Kim, and Robert, decided to run down the side down to where the water level. So it was real steep. sliding down over through the scree and the ash and stuff to get way down there. And then it was even more of a struggle coming back up out of there to get back up to the lip of the crater to where we had our car parked. So we were pretty tired by the time we left Crater Lake.
What I remember about that, Dad, is that it was risky, that there was rocks that we would knock loose and they'd roll down, and somebody was above me and knocked a rock, and it quite a sizable one. I don't know. I mean, it maybe more than a foot in diameter, and it came bouncing down the hill and sort of jumped over my head, and I had a lot of adrenaline at that point. I was trying to avoid getting hit by this rock as it came running down the hill there. And I don't know. My recollection is we never actually went all the way down to the lake. We figured it was too dangerous and maybe started going back up at that point.
That was a good decision. I'm glad you all made that decision. So after we left Crater Lake, we drove on out to the Oregon coast and then just across the border into northern California. There we found this beautiful Crescent Beach right near a place called Crescent City. There was a lot of driftwood there, huge big old logs. Some of the logs 2 and 3 feet in diameter, all tangled and piled up there together on the beach. So we pitched our tent there in a clear place where there wasn't too many logs, and the wind and the waves were crashing there, and it was misty, and we built a campfire in a sheltered place down between some of the logs, had a nice little supper, went to bed, slept there in our tents while the mist and the crashing rain. And then the next day was a nice sunny day, and we could travel on south along the coast in Northern California. And in Northern California, that area, because of all the mist and rain, it grows a lot of beautiful tall redwood trees. And so they call it the Redwood Highway. So we enjoyed stopping every little bit, looking at these big giant trees. And they've got signs out calling your attention to certain big trees that are there. And one of them had been hollowed out, so it made it like a little house. So you had a world famous tree home. And it was just one tree, but hollowed out on the inside to make it like 1 or 2 room house. And we saw that you could drive down this beautiful highway, all these giant tall trees all around you. Once in a while we'd stop and get out and go on a side path, wander out through the jungle or through the forest and look at all the big trees, and climb around on them. We'd never seen such big trees like that. And so it was really neat to travel down that Redwood Highway. Finally, we got to San Francisco, and we enjoyed being there. One of the things about San Francisco is they have these streetcars that clamp onto cables that run underground. And then you get on in the streetcar, and they clamp onto the cable and go zooming along. And then when they want to stop, they unfasten themselves from the cable, and people can get on and off. But at the end of the ride, you have to turn the streetcar around. So they get all the passengers out to help, and you spin it around on this track, and then you're ready to start back where you came from. But San Francisco is on the hills, up and down, kind of steep hills everywhere. We got into San Francisco late at night, found a city park, and went in among some of the trees and slept out under the trees there. And the next morning, we had policemen found us and said we're not supposed to be sleeping in the park. So we told him we were sorry. Then he invited us to go and eat breakfast with him at his house. And then afterwards, we went over to this famous place in San Francisco where the Haight Street crosses Ashbury Street. So they call it Haight Ashbury. And this was the gathering place in the summer of '67, the summer of love, where all the hippies from all over the U.S. were coming to be. So we parked our car nearby and wandered up and down the street, saw the hippies all were there. Of course, by then we looked about as hippie as anybody because we hadn't been cutting our hair, trimming our beards, so we looked like we fit right in. And it was interesting to see all the stuff they were selling and all the people that were gathered there at Haight-Ashbury. So we got some pictures here while we were in this part of San Francisco where they had the Summer of Love. And then we moved on from San Francisco. We went on over toward Yosemite National Park. And we drove into Yosemite, and there was the great big tall cliffs and the waterfalls, Yosemite Falls there at Yosemite National Park. And then we drove around on a winding road that took us way up high on the lip of the canyon. And it's all in granite there. Everything is eroded out of tall granite. And so we got way up there at a place called Inspiration Point, way up high on the lip of the canyon. And we could look across the canyon to see the waterfalls. And then there's a great big dome of granite there that looks like it's been sliced in half. And so they call that Half Dome. And we could look across from where we were at Inspiration Point to where Half Dome is over on the other side. And so I was especially interested in that. When I was 15 years old, I'd gotten to the top of Half Dome with my dad. And we'd come out there to that place to visit the national conference of our church. And so I was telling the boys about that. Sometime later, we all got a chance to climb to the top of Half Dome. But just looking at it from Inspiration Point was a really wonderful experience, looking across the canyon, and there you could see Yosemite Falls, one of the highest falls in the United States. And then you can see the Half Dome there, and a beautiful area. And the Yosemite Falls, as you notice, has one big high falls, and then the water runs along a little ways, and then there's a second falls, which is quite an impressive falls all in its own right. And then also from up there at Yosemite, at the Inspiration Point, there's two other waterfalls coming in from a side valley, and the upper falls that you notice there was called Nevada Falls, and then the water runs down through the forest for ways, and then there's a second falls called Vernal Falls, and those are both beautiful falls, and they're famous, and a lot of people take pictures or just hike up and look at one of those falls. And when you're up at Inspiration Point, you can see both of them together, and then Half Dome is off to the left. Getting into the park from the southeast, you come through a long tunnel. And as you come through the tunnel, there you notice Bridal Veil Falls on your right. And people often are very impressed with that tunnel entrance to the falls. You're driving through the forest for a long ways, and you go into this tunnel, and when you come out, there in front of you is all the grandeur of Yosemite National Park. And that makes it a beautiful place to see. In the park, there are various other domes and rock mountains and beautiful lakes. So there's more to see in that park than you can shake a stick at. It's a very interesting place to visit. Hike around, visit different lakes and reflecting lakes, and climb on mountains. Then we went south from Yosemite National Park into Sequoia. And here at Sequoia, we found some big, tall sequoia trees, and one of them had been cut down and then leveled off a bit, so it was wide enough and big enough that we could drive our car up on it. So here's our beat-up old van now. It's been to Alaska and back and down through California. So we had it drove that up on there and got our picture taken with our car on one of those big sequoia trees. And we went on down through Sequoia to a place called Potwisha, and there we had a beautiful stream flowing by a campsite, and we got into the water there a little bit. It's mostly melted snow, so the water's not too warm to enjoy. It's pretty cold water, but it still feels good to get in the water every once in a while. Then we went from Sequoia Park on back out to the coast, the Pacific coast. And there's where William Randolph Hearst had built himself quite a fancy castle. He'd been all over Europe, and he'd bought parts of castles, big villas, and all kinds of beautiful churches and stuff. Had them shipped to California in pieces with all the blocks numbered. And then he had them reassembled there in California. So when you visit the Hearst estate in California, then you can see all these imported architectural and buildings that have been brought in from all over Europe, France and Italy, Germany, and rebuilt there in Southern California. Then we went on south toward Los Angeles, and there we stopped to visit our grandparents. This is Desmond Bittinger and Irene Bittinger, and then our whole group stopped and spent several days there with them in Chapman, California. And my dad was working there with for the university, the college, Chapman College. And so we had a good time visiting there and telling our stories, getting a chance to rest up, even sleep in a bed once in a while. And then we went on from there. Finally, after several days, we moved on out west from California, and we got over into Arizona. And there in southern Arizona is a place called Zion National Park. And as you approach Zion, you get to this old checkerboard mountain. And it's a huge, big old mountain, and it's been eroded in this strange way that looks like squares. So somebody thought it looked like a checkerboard, kind of tipped up on end, gave it that name. But it's a fascinating bit of erosion there and in sandstone. Then you drive through a big, long tunnel with openings every so often, and you can stop and look out the windows there from this tunnel into Zion Canyon. And eventually you get out of the tunnel, and down in the bottom of the canyon, you can see this beautiful place called Zion National Park, and the big sandstone cliffs, some of them red, some of them white, some of them many other colors. And so you had this beautiful canyon. We camped in the bottom of it by a running stream and enjoyed being in the park. But one of the big famous mountains there in Zion Park is called the Great White Throne. And some of the Mormons that discovered Zion Canyon thought that when the end of the world comes and Jesus comes to judge all the people, separate the good from the bad, that he'll set his great white throne up on top of that mountain there. So that's a nice name for that huge big white mountain. But then we wanted to climb another mountain that was in a park called Lady Mountain. And it's been fixed up pretty nice, or it was fixed up then. So we could go, they had ladders and trails, and cables, all kinds of nice things. So it's quite a strenuous little walk following the trail up the side of the cliff and around the various places. We had to follow the trail marked pretty well and fixed up with the guide rails and cables here and there. And as we got higher and higher, we could see more and more of the canyon. Finally, we got to the very top of the canyon. And what looked like a great mountain from down on the bottom of the canyon, when you get up on top, then you're just on the lip of the canyon. And there's a kind of a little peak there. but you're way up high looking down into this deep canyon. And here's Kim on the edge of the canyon looking down. And down below you can see the visitor center and a swimming pool and parking lots and campgrounds. And we can look from up here on the top of the mountain looking down into the valley. And we were all clowning around up here at the top, getting pictures of each other at the very tip of after we worked so hard to get up there, we were happy to be there for a little while and enjoy ourselves. Looked out over the countryside, beautiful, beautiful scenery, and took pictures of each other there at the very tip of Lady Mountain, looking down into the canyon there at the Zion National Park. Then we came back down from Zion and traveled on over into other parts of Arizona. And one of the parts of Arizona we enjoyed visiting there was near Sedona. And there's a park there known as this in south of Sedona. There's a park there in Oak Creek Canyon. And there they have the water that runs through this sandstone, made it very slippery. And they call this place Slide Rock. And so you can get in the water here and slide down over these rocks, have a whole lot of fun. And so it's like being in a giant slippery slide made by nature and slide through the water. So everybody had a chance to get in the water and slide down over the bumps. And you had to wait your turn because everybody and his brother, it seemed like, were out there trying to get in the water, slide down over it wasn't very deep. You couldn't get very drowned or anything. It was just a nice place to be in the water having fun. Then we went on further around Sedona. There's a beautiful Indian ruin where the Indians had built a cliff dwelling, and they call it Montezuma's Castle. And so we went to look at Montezuma's Castle, climb up on the ladders, look at the caves and structures that the Indians had built, lived in for hundreds of years. And so it's very impressive from a distance. It looks like quite an effort that the Indians had to work for a long time, carrying bricks and mud, cement to build their structure there high in that cliff. And then they were safe from predators and safe from rain and storm. And then they could farm their farms nearby. So we enjoyed being at Montezuma's Castle. Then we traveled a little bit east from there, getting over toward where the Grand Canyon is. And at the upper parts of the Grand Canyon, they call it Glen Canyon. They had built a beautiful bridge over the canyon. And the bridge itself is people come and take pictures of and look at because it's such a beautifully built bridge. And then nearby they have built a big dam to save the water back and then use it for irrigation and for water for people in cities nearby, including Los Angeles. So they have drinking water for Las Vegas and other places, also for generating electricity. So we enjoyed looking at that great big Glen Canyon Dam and the bridge. And then we went on a little bit south from there, and there we got to the Grand Canyon. And so we got to the edge of the Grand Canyon, found a campsite and camped overnight, looked at the canyon the next day from the rim, and enjoyed thinking about how deep it was, a mile deep, all the way down to the bottom of the canyon where the river runs, Colorado River running down through the bottom of the canyon. And so we had a good time. We met a bunch of hippies there on the edge of the canyon where we were camped in the campground. And some of them were pretty hungry. And so we shared some food with them. And then the next morning they came around and we were making pancakes. So we just added a little more water to the batter and a little more flour to the batter. Made a whole bunch of pancakes. Made a lot of syrup. And everybody had a lot of pancakes. They were happy and we were happy. And so we had a good time sharing with them. We wished them well. They were on their way to San Francisco, and we told them we'd already been there. And so then we traveled on east from the Grand Canyon and went out through West Texas, got to El Paso, and then on crossing the desert part of Texas, West Texas. When it got to be dark, we pulled into a roadside park. Since it wasn't raining and there weren't any mosquitoes, we didn't bother to set up a tent. We just put our sleeping bags down beside the table there in the car and slept right there. There were some folks in the car nearby who were trying to sleep, and when they got a good look at us, they packed up and left. So they were kind of scared of us, I think, or they weren't sure what kind of people we turned out to be. But we were having fun. We weren't any danger to anybody. And so we had a good night there, and then we traveled on from there to toward the sunrise coming up over the mountains in West Texas. And then we're thinking about all the things we'd seen, beautiful scenery we'd seen as we traveled on to toward our home in Kingsville. So that tells you the story of our summer, that we traveled from Kingsville all the way to Alaska, and then around through a bunch of national parks, and all the way back to Kingsville. So that
was 50 years ago, Dad. 50 years ago.
50 years ago. Now all the people that were boys in there have all become grandfathers in that time.
Well, so we're retired anyway.
They're retired. Not all of them have become grandfathers yet. I'm glad we got a chance to do it together. It was fun to look back over the memories that we had together going on that adventure together.